There is this narrative that has been going around, and I've been hearing more and more of it lately. It goes something like this. Grappling arts are all more or less the same, and that at some undetermined point in the future, they are almost destined to combine. Now, before I throw some cold water on this, I have to admit I am sympathetic to this view. I have, and still am, suffering from a kind of rule set blues in which I can't really seem to pin down a grappling art that truly encapsulates my interests wholly. I feel like most grappling formats are pretty decent, but they usually always have one or two components that really feel silly to me, and it's difficult to reconcile. This is something I've kind of just accepted as part of the space over the years, and a sort of universal grappling format might just be the solution. Even outside of my personal take, though, I think this is a goal that brings a lot of people together in grappling in a way that few things do. I've certainly seen my fair share of hardline traditionalists harping on about judo and BJJ reunifying into a rebirth of quote-unquote the original judo. Likewise, I've seen the crowd that believes grappling is constantly innovating on itself, even though trends are pretty cyclical in this space, hail this hypothetical united future as a progressivist grappling ideal. You'd struggle to find a singular idea that people who are strangely over-devoted to tradition or progress actually agree on, even if they agree for very different reasons. And if you're interested in what rule set I'd like to see, then yes, I will go into that later in the video, so stay tuned. It might be different than what you're thinking. So yeah, this universal grappling idea would be very cool. But why do I think it probably isn't actually coming anytime soon, though? Maybe never at all, even. Well, the first reason is that I think this is mostly an American premise at this point. My fine countrymen and I sometimes fall into this trap where we think America is somehow a microcosm for the rest of the world, and it usually just isn't. The reason this is important is that in America right now, there is a lot of financial incentive for things like judo and wrestling and frankly whatever other grappling art to move in with BJJ. You see this trend even online. How many videos have X, Y, and Z for BJJ in their title? The hard fact is that judo and wrestling don't have as much money circulating as BJJ does, and this has meant that a lot of these classes open up in BJJ gyms. On a surface level, this seems like the beginnings of the grand merger. Globally, though, this is much less of a thing. Take Japan, for example, where judo is extremely popular and is financially independent for the most part. You might think if BJJ and judo were ever to take another shot at marriage, it would probably be in Japan. The truth on the ground, though, is that BJJ and judo seem pretty content right now with being their own things here. Unlike in the States, there isn't really an incentive to merge in terms of balance sheets, and therefore, they'll probably remain distinct for a long time to come. Even in the States, though, I think this apparent merger is a bit one-sided. I'm sure there are outliers, but over the years, I've seen some of these BJJ gym judo classes. And usually what you're getting is very clearly judo for BJJ. Now, I'm not trying to criticize that necessarily. In fact, it really only makes sense. Most of the judo students are probably there from the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu courses. So don't misconstrue what I'm saying here as blaming the judo coaches or the BJJ students for having their unique demands. All I'm saying is that while it isn't really anyone's fault, judo for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is wildly different than judo for judo. Which brings me to the second major obstacle here. I think a lot of people agree on the grappling merging into a universal format idea, but the devil is very much in the details. People's vision for what this universal grappling format actually looks like is probably vastly different. For example, the version I've most frequently encountered is a universal grappling format that essentially has BJJ at its core. It's a concept that is built around the premise that submissions are king and that everything else should revolve around that one central idea. In this iteration of our hypothetical format, people acknowledge the usefulness of takedowns, but they are also little more than a pit stop on the way to a submission. Once again, I'm not saying that this take is wrong necessarily, and it makes a lot of sense from a BJJ point of view. But I also think this is why so many BJJ places continue to struggle with incorporating takedowns even now, even outside of this conversation about a universal format. Despite a very clear interest in doing so, an interest that seems to be growing day by day, takedowns simply don't matter in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rule set, nor will they ever rise to a competitively meaningful place while people can just sit down. And sure, ADCC finals don't allow it, but I've seen many a finalist deliberately give up a leg to their opponent so they can just pull guard. It's really just pulling guard with extra steps. For me, personally, I don't envision a universal grappling format this way. I think the common line of thinking is mostly about quote-unquote winning here, and in popular grappling culture, what winning is getting the guy to give up. It's very submission-centric. In my eyes, though, a universal grappling format is about demonstrating that you are the better all-around grappler in as many of the phases of the game as is possible. This means that I think takedowns, pins, and submissions should all play a crucial role on the path to a victory. It means I think standing submissions should be allowed too. It also means that I think low-skill decisions like guard pulling ought to come at an associated cost. Now, before anybody jumps on my case about that last comment, I'm not saying that guard pulling isn't legitimate. I think it's perfectly fine as long as it's used to progress the state of the match. But let's make no mistake here. There is a clear difference in skill between, say, sitting to your butt and pulling guard and throwing someone over your back. It's just that one takes very little effort and very little instruction to know how to do properly, while the other can take literal years. A rule set that I really like, although I'd grant is a bit complicated, was some house rules that I once played, and I'm going to describe them for you now. You play to 8 points. The first one there wins. A submission is 8 points. You win, period. A pin of 30 seconds is worth 4 points, and you stand back up afterwards. If you hold the person down for 15 seconds, it's 2 points, assuming they escaped. There is no associated stand-up and reset. A guard pass is also worth 2 points. A takedown is when you force your opponent to make 3 points of contact on the mat, excluding their feet. So, for example, 2 knees and a post would be a takedown, or 2 hands on the mat and 1 knee would be a takedown. There are 2 categories of takedown in this rule set, low and high tier. Low tier is anything that doesn't bring both legs off the mat and or fails to put the other person on their back. These award 2 points. A high-tier takedown is one in which both of the opponent's feet leave the mat and or they land on their back. These are also worth 2 points, but everything you do on the ground after a high-tier takedown gets a ×2 multiplier. That means if you absolutely body a guy and then pass his guard, you get 4 points for the guard pass rather than 2. This also incentivizes the guy who just got thrown to try and stand back to his feet so he can shed that ×2 multiplier. Once he puts both feet back on the mat and is standing, then that multiplier falls off. Guard pulling is allowed in this format, but it comes with a -2 point penalty. So you can, in theory, start the match by sitting down, but keep in mind you now need 10 points to win, not 8. So if your opponent, for some reason, foolishly gives you a triangle in your guard and you submit him for 8 points, you're going to have to reset to standing because you still need 2 more points to win. If your opponent, likewise, can lift you from your guard above his waist, it's a simulated slam and the match is reset to the feet, but the guard puller keeps his -2 points. If you ever reach -6 points, it is an immediate loss. Hey, editing Tengu here, and I just want to make a quick clarification because my language in this section is a little ambiguous. Guard pooling is -2 points. It is not a penalty, which is two different things in this rule set. Basically, this means if you have 6 points on the board and you guard pool, you have 4. The only time that guard pooling really becomes a detriment is when you reach -6, in which case you just lose. So if you have a lot of points, then you can afford to guard pool a lot. Sometimes, in certain variations of this rule set, we would offset this by awarding 1 or 2 points for someone who could lift somebody above their waist in a guard, but other times not. This is really down to how you want to interpret the rules. But yeah, guard pooling is not a penalty. Penalties are something different, and in terms of penalties, it is described as -2 points in the rest of this video, but keep in mind that basically it is 2 warnings, and then on the third time you just lose. It's a separate system from the points. Yeah, could have explained this more clearly. Hopefully that makes sense. If it still doesn't, I'm going to type all of this out in the description so you can take a screenshot or whatever you want. But yeah, that's my clarification. Back to the video as normal. Failed sacrifice throws are not considered guard pooling as long as they are genuine attacks. What constitutes a genuine attack or not is usually going to be down to the referees or the 2 people training. Stalling or backing up out of the competition space results in a -2 penalty. Although being throw out incurs no penalty, it will cause a reset to the feat. Banned techniques or generally unsafe behavior or unsportsmanlike behavior result in an immediate -6 and therefore a loss. The time limit is 5 minutes for each match. The clock will freeze for resets from push-outs and pins, but will otherwise always keep ticking. Obviously, there could be no-gi and jacket divisions. And that's it. Keep in mind that these were house rules, right? They were never really meant to be so polished that they would be fit for tournaments. I am sure that they would need to be more formalized and tuned and tweaked and changed. I mostly described these to you because I wanted to illustrate something close to what I'd like to see. And to me, it's a format where basically everything is legal, but there are ways to win that involve submissions, pins, and takedowns. And on top of that, it really incentivizes very skillful play. That isn't to say that playing guard isn't skillful, but if you just want to sit into your guard, that is a low skill entry. Therefore, you have to have some mastery or at least knowledge of every phase, or if you don't, you have to be willing to play at a -2 or 4, or, well, -2 or 4 really, deficit. At the end of the day, though, I think those of us wanting a more combined rule set are a loud minority. The fact of the matter is that there is a quiet majority in martial arts, and they tend to generate most of the money for gyms. No matter how we like to theorize or philosophize, the fact is that most people join judo because they want to do judo, not some hypothetical universal grappling format. And this is especially true in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because a massive amount of people join up specifically to avoid phases of grappling. Now, while these more niche sports could certainly coexist with a more universal rule set, my point is that I don't think there is quite enough demand for it yet. My gut feeling is that those of us who want to see a more encapsulating format are probably a loud minority. This video has been a bit all over the place, so I just want to summarize things a little before I go. Yes, a universal grappling format would be very cool. I'm very much for it. I think it's far off, however, because A, there isn't much financial incentive, B, people have very different ideas in regard to how the format should be designed, and C, despite a growing interest in this area, I think many underestimate how disinterested a lot more casual hobbyists really are. Keep in mind, none of this is exactly a deal breaker, though. Casual hobbyists can be persuaded. After all, most consumers don't know they want something until they actually see it. That's kind of the point of commercials, so maybe we just need to market better. Likewise, there are some positive signs like the small but seemingly growing no-gi judo scene. If I had to say, I think the area this thing is lacking in the most is an actual rule set, which is why I spent so much time in this video discussing one that I've enjoyed in the past. I have no doubt that the format will be another battleground. Heck, even in modern Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the best format is still being tuned and debated over. But having a format that actually rewards proficiency in all grappling stages is better than not having one at all, I think. And personally, I'd feel much better about the odds of seeing a more universal grappling format in my lifetime if more gyms were playing with format design. Don't get me wrong, I think this is mostly going to be an after-class grassroots movement for many years to come. But if there is any silver lining, any sliver of hope, it's that most interesting martial arts projects tend to start with a small group of guys just goofing around in a small dingy room somewhere, completely undocumented. Who knows, maybe the progenitors of the format are out there right now, or maybe they're in my comments section, and if that ends up being you, credit me. I'm joking, you don't have to do that. It'd be nice though. Anyway, this is really all for me in this video. If you guys goof with my rule set or make your own or hate my rule set, I'd love to hear about it below. I also have to apologize for the slower upload schedule this past week. If you just wanted to watch the video content, you're more than welcome to click off now. For the remainder short 45 seconds or so, I'm going to give a little bit of an update just so you guys know what's going on. So, not only did life get busy, but I did definitely get around to finally training down at the Kodokan. A quick update on that. I very questionably signed up for the Randori class, and my first day was when all the university students were there, and I got like 2 Tomoe Nages off successfully, and then spent the rest of the session climbing out of mat craters. It was great, don't get me wrong, but it had me reflecting on how long it has been since I've consistently trained judo, and really the last time was around 2017, I realized, which is wild. My then teacher had a few surgeries done, and then I was in Japan for 3 years, and then there was the pandemic, so while it doesn't feel like it was all that long ago to me, it's actually been close to 7 years that I was training more consistently, I guess off and on in that time. Maybe I've trained judo once or twice a week, but that's very different than doing it like 3 or 4 times at a fairly high level. So I'm kind of thinking about withdrawing from the Randori class for now and joining the course with more explicit instruction. That way I can sharpen some clearly decayed technical details I have and just get back into shape. Obviously, the other dimension to all this is that I haven't really been training all that much because I've been moving to Japan. My cardio and all that isn't really where I'd like it to be either. I don't have any delusions about defeating university kids 10 years my junior who basically do this full time, but I'd certainly like to get to the point where I can be a useful challenge to them, if not in some small way. And of course, my own progress is very much a factor. I want to continue to grow in the art. All right, now that's all from me. Hopefully back to a normal uploading schedule this week. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.